around the world, across our nation, and in the local and statewide area. Let's view the news. The news is what's happening today, which people will call history in the future, because what we call history today was news when it happened. Hi, everybody. This is Bronson Staley with our student reporters, and we've got news for you from this week, which ends October and begins November 1978. Now, here's what in the world is happening.
Around the world, oil field workers in Iran go on strike for higher pay and as a protest against their government. Natalie Huff reports that story. Across our nation, Halloween visits every community, and even the White House celebrates. David Hobbs has that report. And in the local area, world-famous comedian Bob Hope visits Washington County, and Let's View the News is granted an exclusive interview. Monica Smith tells about that with Tyler Hoffman out on location. Now first, with world news, here is Natalie Huff. Many workers in the oil fields in the nation of Iran went on strike earlier this week. The workers believe they should have higher pay for their work, and many workers are opposed to their government, headed by the Shah of Iran. The strike has shut down much of Iran's oil production.
The closing of the oil fields underscores the vulnerability of the U.S. and other Western powers in depending on Iranian oil. Iran is the world's second-largest exporter of petroleum after Saudi Arabia. And while the U.S. receives only 1/10 of its total oil imports from Iran, an upheaval there could affect the flow of petroleum to America's allies, including Israel, which is heavily dependent upon Iran for oil. It could also help drive up the world price of petroleum.
The United States is concerned about the strike in the oil fields in Iran. We depend on Iran for about 1/10 of the oil we import. And we are friends with the Shah of Iran, who is improving the living standards of his people. The Shah's son is attending school here in the United States. On his 18th birthday, President Carter invited him to the White House.
In Washington, President Carter used a courtesy call by the Shah's son, 18-year-old Crown Prince Reza, as an occasion to express support for the Shah. Mr. Carter told the prince he hoped the current disturbances could soon be resolved, and described the Shah's government as progressive and very valuable to the entire Western world.
Iran is not one of the Arab countries, but it is an important nation in the Middle East. And Soviet Russia would probably like to have more control there because of Iran's oil production and its location near Russia.
Thank you, Natalie Huff. And now for World News Study Aid. For our study aid, first of all, we're going to turn to our globe and hope that you'll do the same and locate where this news is coming from. We'll first of all want to take a look at the Mediterranean Sea area, which is just north of Africa. And by now, you ought to know where that is located. Once you've located the Mediterranean Sea, you'll want to look over in the eastern portion, that is to the right. And that is the section of the world that we know as the Middle East. If you continue traveling easterly from that eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, passing over a couple of nations, you'll see the nation of Iran, right below the Caspian Sea. Iran, located there on your globe. And now for our World News Study Aid vocabulary. We're talking about a strike of workers in Iran. A strike, as you know, is when workers stay away from their work for some very important reasons that they're hoping to accomplish, something that they want. This is a strike by oil field workers in Iran. And obviously, these are people who work in the oil field. The oil field is where oil is brought up from under the ground. We spoke of the Shah of Iran. This is the man who is the ruler of Iran, the Shah of Iran. We spoke also of the oil import. in the United States. We import oil here from Iran, among a number of other nations. And when we import something, well, that means it's something that's brought into a country from another country to be used or to be sold. Living standards were mentioned too. Well, what is a living standard? How well people live, what kind of housing they have, their food, their clothing, education, communication, transportation, and so on. Living standards.
Next, with national news, here is David Hoff.
Although much of our news is often very serious and sometimes filled with problems, we should remember that not all news is really so serious. One example is the fact that just a few days ago, communities across our nation celebrated Halloween. With parades and trick-or-treaters making up the scene, ghosts, goblins, and witches were traveling all over America. Pumpkins are also an important part of the celebration, and so, two brothers who grow pumpkins believe that every school child in their community should have one for their very own.
But who are all these kids running through the Venatucci pumpkin patch? They are the school children Nick and Tony Venatucci invite out to the farm every fall to pick the pumpkin of their heart's desire.
I got even bigger.
We watched all this and then asked Tony Venatucci why he and Nick do it.
We love it. We love to have these youngsters. And a lot of these youngsters, what you see out here now, they'll never forget this all the rest of their lives. Well, look at the thrill they're getting out here. Look at them. They're going wild.
There are thousands of school children around Colorado Springs. This year, Nick Venatucci, who does the growing, grew 30 tons of pumpkins just to give away to them.
Well, there's certainly no shortage of kids out here.
No, the population's growing. Kind of look like I'm going to have to plant more pumpkins next year, don't it?
People in Washington, D.C. may have wondered where a giant jack-o'-lantern came from that appeared at the White House entrance. But they understood what it was all about when they learned that the White House had a Halloween party.
As part of the festivities, the Carters redecorated the north entrance to the White House. The guests had to enter in the teeth of a pumpkin, so to speak. Mrs. Carter wore a black dress decorated with pumpkins and witches. The president is apparently not as big a Halloween fan. The president wore a business suit. Perhaps he'll get more in the spirit as the day wears on.
By the way, from Let's View the News, we wish you a belated Happy Halloween. And one thing more. Come a little closer. Boo!
Thank you, David Hogg. And now for National News Study Aid. We're talking here about a subject we spoke about last week, Halloween. Only that time we were talking about some observances of Halloween in the local area. By now, I hope you know what Halloween is. We spoke also here about pumpkins. That is a fruit or a vegetable. What would you call it? Well, the kind we're speaking of here is the kind of pumpkin that's a big orange sphere. There are all different kinds of pumpkins, by the way. Some of them are green. Have you ever seen those before? We spoke of a jack-o'-lantern. Well, for Halloween, an orange pumpkin shell with holes made in it, forming a face, is a jack-o'-lantern. You put a light inside to shine through the holes. I guess you know what a jack-o'-lantern is. And, of course, we spoke about the White House, where the president lives.
Now, for local news, here is Monica Smith. Washington County had a lot of excitement all in one weekend. First, there was the official Mummers Parade to celebrate Halloween. And then, on Sunday evening, the Maryland Theater in Hagerstown was filled with excited, laughing fans of a famous comedy star of television, radio, and moving pictures. Mr. Bob Hope was performing in person in Hagerstown. And Let's View the News was there to report that exciting event. Tyler Hoffman covered the story, and here's his report.
It hasn't been very often that well-known entertaining stars
have come to Washington County. But now, since the Maryland Theater has opened again and has been prepared for live performances on stage, we've begun to see more famous people appearing here. Certainly a good example is the star who has come for a special fundraising show. He's one of the best-known comedians around the world, and it's really an exciting time when Mr. Bob Hope comes to the Maryland Theater in Hagerstown. Mr. Hope arrived at the Maryland Theater stage door after the show had begun. There was a rush of fans and news reporters to meet him, and he even stopped to sign an autograph. The bright television lights made it difficult to see his way in. It wasn't long before he came out on stage. The audience stood up and applauded for a long while, welcoming this longtime favorite comedian to Hagerstown. And then he began telling the jokes he's become famous for. The well-known Bob Hope jokes are mainly what the audience came to hear.
Thank you. Thank you. That's amazing. The first time I played here in vaudeville, I didn't get that kind of reception. I played here about 40 years ago. I really did, in vaudeville. And then I went into radio and Broadway and pictures and television. And here I am back at Hagerstown. Where did I go wrong? No, I'm thrilled to be here.
Mr. Hope's jokes often poke fun at people and the things they do, and he frequently pokes fun at himself. But it's interesting to notice that you have to know what's going on in the news to understand many of his jokes.
This is the stuff I've been telling you about. But it's so nice. We've had strange weather in LA. It's been burning out there. We've had all kinds of fires. You know, it burned right up to John Wayne's feet and stopped. And they've had a mudslide. A friend of mine had one of those cantilever houses, and in 1 hour his zip code changed 3 times. How about it? Should we do our opening number? This is my favorite city. This is my favorite town. Now that standing ovation proved to me you were sports, but maybe you were standing just to rearrange your shorts. What a talented face.
Besides telling jokes, Mr. Hope also did some singing and dancing, just as he had done when he was in vaudeville. It's hard to believe that he's 75 years old, or that he probably wasn't feeling too well, because he was doing his show in spite of the fact that he had caught a cold.
This is my favorite time. Now it's some of the jokes don't quite make me grade. That's anyway, hell, you've already paid. When my rambling days are over, this is where I'm gonna settle down. And people see, where do you like to play? I will proudly say that I was in here at this beautiful Maryland Theater in this pretty town of Hagerstown, which is the gateway to Funkstown.
Mr. Hope's wife came along on this tour, and she also sang a song. Mr. and Mrs. Hope have been married a long while. Mrs. Hope was a singer when Mr. Hope met and married her early in his career.
Wonderful, marvelous, that you should care for me.
That's the humor you laugh at every joke.
Mr. Hope closed his show the same way he often does on television.
I didn't laugh too much at that too to ruin the whole thing. People of America are marvelous. I think it's because they realize we live in the greatest country on earth, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure.
Later, after the show, over at the Sheraton Motor Inn where he spent the night, Mr. Hope took some time out to answer some questions just for us on Let's View the News. Mr. Hope, of all the famous people you've entertained, whom did you enjoy the most?
Well, that's a good question because it's difficult. I don't know. I've entertained an awful lot of people in my career. And I would say maybe General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, or maybe Queen Elizabeth, something like that. As far as if you're singling out people, but if you talked about masses, I would say my greatest experience, of course, has been entertaining the troops overseas. Did a lot of that, and I enjoyed that. It was very gratifying.
How did you begin as a comedian?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about that. Somebody said I stuck my head out in the subway to look for the train, and it came along. And then there's been a lot of talk about me falling, hitting my head different spots. Actually, I think I was very lucky that I was born with a sense of timing, and which is the secret ingredient of a comedian. Because I found out when I went on the stage and started to talk that I could tell jokes and make people laugh. And I started doing it right after my dancing act because I found out it was much easier to stand and talk than to dance.
What was the funniest joke you've ever told?
You got me there. That's very hard to say. I've been asked that a lot of times, but I've told so many jokes in my career, and I go back a long way with jokes, almost 45 years, and that's very hard to pick out one joke and say it's the funniest joke because I can't do that. I know there are jokes that helped me along the way, and for instance, I was a newspaper reporter for 6 years for King Features because I did a show in Washington for President Roosevelt, and at that time he was an arch enemy of Colonel McCormick, and I said his dog Fallon was the only dog housebroken on the Chicago Tribune, and that of course played, you wouldn't understand that because a little before your time. And I think we're a little after your time right now. It's a little late for you, isn't it? But anyway, that joke and a couple of others, like in those days I said President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill were conferring on war strategy. War strategy meaning where and when will we attack the enemy and how will we keep Eleanor out of the crossfire. Which doesn't mean anything to you these days, but that was a funny joke in those days. And it got me a column for King Features. But I do jokes all the time. And just as tonight, I told a joke about Begin and Sadat winning the Nobel Peace Prize, and they're still fighting. That's worth a smile, huh?
Could I have your autograph?
You want the 50 or the dollar? You sure can. What's your name?
Tyler Hoffman.
Huh?
Tyler.
Tyler? There you are, Tyler. Right. Any money in this, or?
Bright lights, exciting music, and theater full of people laughing at the jokes of Mr. Bob Hope. That was the scene at the Maryland Theater in Hagerstown on Sunday evening, October 29, 1978. and a lot of people will remember the evening for a long time to come.